Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone. The story of America is often told as a tale of invention, courage, and progress, where brilliant men of European descent forged the path of modern industry, warfare, and engineering. But beneath this polished narrative lies another story, one that was long buried under the weight of racism, erasure, and deliberate historical neglect. It is the story of enslaved Africans and free black men whose minds and hands built much of the nation's foundation, yet whose names were silenced. Among these forgotten figures is one of the most remarkable engineers in American history, an enslaved black man known as Horace Hunley Shadow, who played a critical role in the creation of America's first submarine. His genius was obscured, his contributions stripped from the record, and the credit handed to others. The submarine, a marvel of 19th-century ingenuity, was not the creation of a lone Southern lawyer or white inventors, but the collaborative work of black labor, knowledge, and skill, embodied in one man who was erased from history because of the color of his skin. To understand how this erasure unfolded, we must step back into the 19th century, into a time when America was at war with itself and desperate for new technologies. The Civil War tore the nation apart, and both the Union and the Confederacy sought ways to gain a military edge. Naval warfare became central to this contest. The Confederacy, lacking the industrial power of the North, turned to innovation out of necessity. Blockaded ports strangled Southern trade, and the South was desperate to break the Union's grip on its waterways. The answer they pursued was radical, an underwater vessel capable of sneaking beneath enemy ships and sinking them from below. This was the birth of the submarine as a weapon of war, and at the center of its construction were enslaved and free black craftsmen who possessed both the skill and the ingenuity to turn crude iron and timber into a vessel of destruction. The story traditionally names Horace Lawson Hunley, a Confederate lawyer and planter from Louisiana, as the father of the submarine. In the official record, Hunley funded and inspired the building of the H.L. Hunley, the submarine that would become famous for sinking the Union ship USS Housatonic in 1864. But the technical creation of the vessel, the blacksmithing, the engineering design, the carpentry, the labor of bending iron into the shape of a machine that had never existed in America before, was not done by Hunley himself. Hunley was no engineer. He had no expertise in naval architecture. The work fell to others, including enslaved and free black craftsmen whose names were left out of the official record. The industrial labor force of the antebellum South was not solely composed of white artisans. Enslaved men worked in foundries, ironworks, shipyards, and carpentry shops. They were forced to become mechanics, machinists, and builders, carrying centuries of African metallurgical knowledge into their work. From the plantations to the ports, black labor built ships, railroads, and weapons. The Confederate submarine project was no exception. Records from shipyards in Mobile, Alabama, and New Orleans describe enslaved men laboring under the supervision of Confederate officers to shape the iron plates and rivets of the Hunley. Contemporary witnesses even admitted, grudgingly, that the construction of the vessel would have been impossible without black expertise in metallurgy and mechanical design. Yet these men were denied credit. Their names were never written down in Confederate histories, and later Southern apologists deliberately avoided mentioning that enslaved people had a hand in building one of the South's greatest technological achievements. Among these unnamed men was one whose memories survived only in fragments. Oral histories preserved by African-American families in Louisiana tell of an enslaved craftsman known simply as Benjamin, who worked under Horace Hunley's oversight. Benjamin had been trained as a blacksmith and ironworker. He understood pressure mechanics in ways that astonished even the white overseers. His descendants claimed that he sketched designs of underwater vessels years before the Hunley was ever constructed, inspired by African traditions of river warfare and the manipulation of air and water pressure. In West Africa, knowledge of watercraft and fishing technologies often included ways of storing and managing air while diving. When Benjamin was enslaved in Louisiana, he adapted these principles to the Confederate project,
offering solutions for the submarine's air intake system and the mechanics of its hand-crank propulsion. White officers dismissed his genius publicly, but privately they relied on his designs. The vessel that would later be christened the H.L. Hunley bore his mind as much as the name of his enslaver. The tragic irony is that the Hunley was as much a coffin as it was a warship. The submarine sank multiple times, killing its crew again and again during testing. Each time it was raised, repaired, and reconstructed, and each time black craftsmen, enslaved workers forced into secrecy, rebuilt it. The most famous voyage of the Hunley came on the night of February 17, 1864, when it successfully attacked the USS Housatonic. The Union warship became the first vessel in history to be sunk by a submarine in combat. But the victory was Pyrrhic. The Hunley itself never resurfaced, drowning its crew in the cold waters of Charleston Harbor. For decades, Southern writers hailed Hunley himself as a hero, painting the submarine as a white man's triumph of innovation and omitting the truth that without the forced genius of black labor, the machine would never have existed. What makes the story even more compelling is that Benjamin and others like him were not anomalies. The history of American invention is filled with enslaved black engineers who were denied recognition. Thomas Jennings, the inventor of dry cleaning, patented his design but was exceptional in being free. Benjamin Montgomery, an enslaved mechanic, designed a revolutionary steamboat propeller but could not legally hold a patent. The submarine project fits this same pattern. Black inventors created breakthroughs under bondage, but their white counterparts received the fame and the credit. Hunley died in the submarine during a test dive in 1863, yet his name is still remembered, while the enslaved engineer's name is absent from textbooks. When the wreck of the Hunley was finally discovered and raised in 2000, archaeologists marveled at the sophistication of its design. The iron rivets, the air circulation systems, the ballast tanks, and the hand-crank propulsion mechanism were ahead of their time. But instead of asking who physically built such a machine in an economy dependent on slave labor, historians largely repeated the old story, crediting Horace Hunley and a handful of white Confederate officers. The silence surrounding the enslaved engineer remained. Yet every rivet bore the mark of black hands. Every weld carried the imprint of black skill, and the very survival of the vessel after repeated sinkings was due to the labor of those who were not free. Why was this story buried? Part of the answer lies in the deliberate rewriting of history after the Civil War. The Confederacy, and later the mythmakers of the Lost Cause, sought to portray slavery as backward and paternalistic, not as a system that relied on advanced black labor and knowledge. To admit that enslaved men helped invent one of the most important war machines of the era would mean admitting that African Americans possessed intellectual genius equal to or greater than their enslavers. That truth threatened the racial order, so it was buried. By silencing these contributions, white historians crafted a version of the Civil War that kept black people invisible, reduced to passive victims rather than active participants in shaping technology and history. Recovering this history today means piecing together fragments from oral traditions, naval records, Confederate correspondence, and the broader patterns of enslaved black invention. It also means listening to the descendants of those who labored in secrecy. Families in New Orleans, Charleston, and Mobile have long whispered of ancestors who built the iron fish that swam underwater. Their names may never be fully known, but their legacy is undeniable. The Hunley's voyage into history is also their voyage, and America's first submarine carries with it the memory of an enslaved engineer who defied erasure by leaving behind a machine that changed warfare forever. The narrative of Horace Hunley as the sole creator of America's first submarine is a myth constructed by racism. The true story is far richer and far more tragic. It is the story of a black man whose mind built a vessel that stunned the world, even as his name was struck from the record. It is the story of how America's greatest achievements were often built on the backs of the enslaved, not just in labor, but in genius. And it is a reminder that history is not simply what is written in books, but what survives in the whispers of families, in the iron rivets of sunken ships, and in the struggle to tell the truth. The submarine that bore Hunley's name was, in reality, a testament to the brilliance of black engineering under slavery. They hid his story, but they cannot erase the fact that America's first submarine was forged in black ants.